So I'm going to use this kind of Venn diagram to first show what some of the three, what I think are the three major problems facing global civilization, but bring it home focused here in Hawaii. But that's my purview. My purview is only the island of Hawaii. But this issue, as you'll see, is going to affect us worldwide, and certainly particularly so here in Hawaii. We have three major issues facing us going forward. One is liquid fuel depletion, which I'll explain, atmospheric carbon loading, and tropical agriculture. This is an old slide that many of you have probably seen because it's been replicated in many state publications, even newspaper. And it's a little bit old data, but if nothing, it's gotten worse. And what it shows is that Hawaii is more dependent upon oil for its energy than any other state in the Union. 20 years ago, that wasn't perceived as an issue. That's fine. I mean, we don't have any oil here in Hawaii, so what's the problem with purchasing oil from somewhere else and running our lifestyles? Even though we actually knew 20 or 30 years ago that this was an issue, it's really only come to light lately that this is a really, really serious issue. And Hawaii is going to be, it is already, the canary in the coal mine for what the entire world is facing. This graph shows the production of oil through time. The vertical dotted line indicates where we were, gosh, almost 10 years ago now. And so everything to the right side of that line were predictions based upon the mathematics of the previous historic oil production. And indeed, those mathematical models have been pretty accurate. So basically, over the last 6 years, the world has not been able to produce any additional liquid fuel for consumption, even though oil prices, tripled, went at almost $150 per barrel. And indeed, in the last couple of weeks, it's inching up and up and up. So classical economic theory predicts that when prices go up, somebody puts more on the table, right? The entire world economic agenda is being turned on its head because everybody from Wall Street to Saudi Arabia, sheikhs have realized, wow, we're in a totally different game now. Everything we've known, what drives the world in the past, is not going to be the same going forward because economics just doesn't recognize things like thermodynamics and the geologic production of certain resources. Standard economic theory also predicts what something is called replacement. So when a resource or item becomes too expensive, maybe by one manufacturer, somebody else is going to produce it cheaper. Or maybe they'll produce something better, an alternative, right, that can do the same thing. Okay? This is another area where economic theory doesn't recognize the law of thermodynamics. So what this graph shows is a general historic trend in the changing use of different fuel sources to our society throughout the world. Historically, everybody burned wood, right? Then, beginning in England, we discovered cheap coal. Coal seams right at the surface. People just shoveled them out and kept themselves warm and dirty during the winter. Then we discovered cheap oil, largely in Texas, actually Pennsylvania, but usually mostly in the U.S. and then it went worldwide. Since cheap oil, in fact, there is no cheap oil anymore, as the issue in the Gulf of Mexico has just demonstrated. Everybody is aware now of the difficulty of continuing to extract oil, and that we will go quite literally to the ends of the earth to do so. The ends of the earth, just working at the ends of the earth is very, very expensive, and there will be very, very dire consequences from extracting those. So we're at expensive oil now. We're actually even at expensive coal. There's no more, coal seams that you can just walk out your backyard and pick it up. We're literally scraping the face off the surface of the earth to access the remaining coal. Everything below coal, there's liquid natural gas that they can move around. Most of the gaseous gas that we use for power is stranded. It's not available to most of the world. Everything below that coal and oil, below that dotted line, And that dotted line represents an energetic return, right? So of less than 5 to 1. And what we mean by that is that you have to extract some energy. If you're going to burn coal, you got to walk out and you got to dig it out of the ground, right? You expend energy, and you can measure that in caloric value. How much energy did it cost me to pull that coal out of the ground versus how much energy am I going to get when I burn it, okay? Oil is what created our current industrialized world, because the energetic returns on Spindletop, the big wells, early wells in Texas or Saudi Arabia, literally you punched a hole in the ground, and sometimes it was with a pickaxe, right? A little bit, a little bit of, spam musubi energetic input, and all of a sudden, oil came spurting out 200 feet in the air. Enormous energetic returns, right? Now we're down to right around 6, 7 to 1. We're below 10 to 1 for most energetic extractions. When we go below that line, we're below 5 to 1. So if we go back to where we started, we're at the same place. That line represents the Industrial Revolution. We are approaching, as a world community, again utilizing resources that we had prior to the Industrial Revolution. That's how serious this issue is from the science of thermodynamics. Okay? We're not going to have as much energy to power the world as we have in the last 100 years, just because the sources of those are no longer available to us, or in increasingly or decreasing quantities. That's one major issue. And again, it's going to affect us here, particularly in Hawaii, because we don't have any of those resources. We've always been required to purchase them from somebody else. The next issue we'll talk about is the impact this issue has on climate change. Again, the law of economics has a strong hand, okay? And so as oil depletes, we will look for other forms of abundant, dense energy to use, okay? This graph shows the estimated remaining amounts of fossil fuels or dense carbohydrates available for us as a world society to burn. Oil, gas, coal, and other things like various types of kerogen, oil shales, methane hydrates, and so forth. So we know really well there's not much oil and gas left. There's lots and lots of coal left. Not at the surface. There's a lot. It's buried down beneath, communities, beneath farms, ranches, mountains. But there's a lot there. And economics is exercising its hand, and we're going after it. So it's not that we're running out of energy. What we're running out of is the cheap, available, super dense energy. But we're going to go after the coal. This graph is from early IPCC work that shows on the bottom and time, the dates, and the left hand, the atmospheric carbon loading in parts per million, based upon burning of different types of fossil fuel. If we look at one line, the lower one that represents gas and oil, because they recognize there's only a limited amount out there. We could actually burn every last drop of oil in the world, right? And we would only elevate atmospheric carbon levels to a certain amount, and probably kind of below the tipping point that everybody is looking at, right? But if we go into serious burning of coal, like we did in the early part of the Industrial Revolution before we tapped into oil, if we go into serious burning of coal, we'll surpass that tipping point very, very quickly to a very, very large degree. So one of the biggest issues of liquid fuel depletion, not having enough oil, is not that you can't fuel your car, right? It's that it's going to drive us to use these dirtier, more abundant forms of carbon like coal. That is the biggest issue for the global society. And indeed, that is exactly what is happening. China burns 42% of the world's coal and is adding the equivalent of nearly the entire UK power grid each year in new coal-fired power plants alone. Okay, so this is happening, right? It doesn't happen here per se, right? Because we live so well, right? We can say, no, we're not going to have a coal-fired power plant. We're still rich enough to purchase $100 barrel of oil, okay? China cannot, right? They're going to do whatever it takes to power their society because there's 1 billion people over there who are tired of riding bicycles and they want 24/7 electricity. And they're not going to stop until they either get it or they've completely depleted the necessary resources to try to achieve that. Interestingly, at the same time, last year, clean energy investment in China totaled over $340 billion, compared with only $18 billion in the United States. Last month, Chinese officials announced that they'll spend $75 billion a year on clean energy going forward. $75 billion per year would exceed the rest of the world combined by a large margin. So it's hard to point fingers at them. You know, they want the same things that we've had, right? And so they're going to burn whatever they can get their hands on, right? At the same time, they're also very, very smart. And so they recognize that just like we used up all the oil before they ever got industrialized, they're going to use up all the coal really fast also. So they are investing in their future, okay? Here's the other interesting thing, is that, and we'll talk about technology, and this is kind of a misconception about how we're going to get out of this problem, and that is that it's not a problem. It's more technically described as a predicament. A problem is something that we can search for and find a solution for. A predicament is a hole that you've dug yourself into and there's no ladder. You just got to learn to live in the hole, all right? This issue is a predicament, right? Because you can't climb back up the ladder of thermodynamics, right? These types of fuels were a one-time gift to us, and we're burning through them very, very quickly, and there's no way back up, all right? So technology, although we tend to pray to the gods of technology. Technology is great, and we'll continue to improve that and use it going forward. Technology consumes energy. It does not produce energy. Energy is, flows from a few very, very limited sources. And technology allows us to capture some of that energy, but it doesn't generate energy. Okay? There's something called Jevons, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. Jevons paradox, Jevon, apostrophe S. And he pointed it out early in the early part of the Industrial Revolution, but it's been documented again and again and again in many, many fields. And it's the paradox of increased efficiency actually leads to greater consumption of whatever you're doing. And it's very well documented in a whole bunch of fields, including energy conservation. Okay? So, and it makes sense, right? If gasoline goes up, right, and you go, oh, I got to go buy a Prius, right, that gets greater gas mileage, you don't stop driving, you don't drive fewer miles because you can afford to drive more. You'll drive the same. In fact, what the data shows is that you'll drive more, right? So every improvement in our ability to conserve something actually leads to consumption of more of it. In addition to that, remember, even if we do choose as individuals or as a society here to be green, okay? I'm going to do something about climate change. I'm not going to burn that extra gallon of oil. I'm not going to burn that extra pound of coal. There's 1 billion Chinese that will burn it with gusto. Okay? They don't have, that the rest of the world is chasing us in our lifestyles, and they want to be where we're at, and they're going to use it, right? So the concept of finding our way out of a predicament through conservation, it, fails in the face of reality. That's just not going to happen for those two